The drawing room of Ashford Hall had never been so full or so quiet. 40 guests, the finest names in London society. They had all come for one reason, to watch a duchess be destroyed. Duke Edmund of Ashford stood by the fireplace, tall and proud, with Miss Lavinia Crane glowing at his side in crimson silk. And then he said the words, loudly, so that no one in that room could pretend they had not heard. "Charlotte, you will serve the tea. Miss Crane takes hers with lemon." A gasp ran through the room like a cold wind. A duke ordering his own wife to serve tea to his mistress, like a common maid, in front of everyone. Lady Pembroke pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Old Colonel Hastings looked at the floor. No one dared to breathe. Every eye turned to the Duchess. Charlotte did not cry. She did not tremble. She did not say a single word. She simply rose from her chair, smoothed her plain gray dress, and walked calm and unhurried toward the tall glass cabinet at the end of the room. But she did not reach for the tea service on the middle shelf. No. She took a small key from the chain at her waist, unlocked the highest shelf, the one no servant had ever been allowed to touch, and lifted out a single cup. One cup. The guests leaned forward. In 3 years no one had ever seen it. Charlotte crossed the room, her steps soft on the carpet, and set that cup down gently in front of Lavinia Crane. And that is when it happened. The Dowager Countess Whitmore, 80 years old, a woman who had taken tea with kings, looked at that cup, and the saucer slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Her face had gone white as paper. "Dear God," she whispered, "it cannot be." The room fell into a silence so deep you could hear the clock ticking in the hall. Lavinia Crane stared down at the cup before her, and for the first time that afternoon, her smile began to die. Because that little cup was not just porcelain. That cup was a weapon, and Charlotte had been waiting 3 long years to use it. But to understand what that cup truly was, and why it would bring a duke to his knees, we must go back. Back 3 years, to a cold morning in November, when a quiet young woman in a plain gray dress walked into Ashford Hall as an unwanted bride. 3 years earlier, the marriage contract lay on the desk between them, and Duke Edmund of Ashford looked at it the way a man looks at his own grave. "So this is what it has come to," he said bitterly. "The Duke of Ashford sold like a horse at market." His lawyer, Mr. Finch, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Grace, the debt your late father owed to Baron Hale is considerable. The Baron's daughter is willing. The marriage settles everything. Quietly. No one in society ever needs to know how close this house came to ruin." That was the one thing, the only asterisk thing that mattered to Edmund. No one could ever know. To the world, the Duke of Ashford was wealth itself. The grand estate, the horses, the parties. But behind the tall doors of Ashford Hall, the truth was rotting like old wood. His father had gambled away nearly everything, and the creditors were circling like wolves. And the only rope thrown to a drowning man was this: marry the daughter of Baron Hale, a minor baron, a nobody, a family so far beneath his own that Edmund had never even bothered to learn their name at parties. "What is she like?" Edmund asked, not because he cared, but because a man ought to know what he is buying. Mr. Finch hesitated. "She is quiet, your Grace, modest. They say she is plain." Edmund laughed, a short, cold laugh with no joy in it. "Plain and quiet. Wonderful. My father lost a fortune, and I inherit a gray little mouse." Oh, how those words would come back to haunt him. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in a cold church with almost no guests. Edmund had insisted on that. The fewer people who saw this marriage, the fewer questions would be asked. Charlotte Hale arrived in a simple ivory dress, with no jewels, no lace, no fuss. She was 26 years old, nearly an old maid by society's cruel arithmetic, with calm brown eyes and hands folded neatly in front of her. Edmund barely looked at her. But if he had looked, truly looked, he might have noticed some strange things about his bride. He might have noticed that, when the bishop spoke to her in passing, he bowed his head just a little too deeply for a baron's daughter. He might have noticed that her posture was not the posture of a country nobody, but the perfect, trained stillness of someone raised very close to power. He might have noticed that when she signed the register, her handwriting was elegant, practiced, precise, the handwriting of a woman who had written many important letters in her life. But Edmund noticed none of it. Pride is blind, and Edmund's pride was the blindest in England. At the altar, when the moment came, he said his vows in a flat, dead voice, staring over her head at the church wall. Charlotte, however, said hers clearly, calmly, almost, and this was the strange part, almost as if she were not making a promise to him at all, but keeping a promise she had made to someone else. "You may kiss the bride," the bishop said. Edmund gave her a cold, dry kiss on the cheek, the kind you would give a distant aunt. Then he turned and walked down the aisle without offering her his arm. Charlotte followed, 3 steps behind, her chin level, her eyes calm. The old bishop watched her go, and there was something in his face that no one saw, something like sorrow, something like respect. "That poor man," the bishop murmured to himself, watching the duke's proud back. "He has no idea who he just married." The wedding night, there was no wedding night. Edmund had his things moved to the east wing of Ashford Hall. Charlotte was given rooms in the west wing, small ones, near the servants' staircase. The message was clear: you are the payment of a debt, nothing more. That first evening, the housekeeper, Mrs. Reed, knocked on the new duchess's door, half expecting to find her in tears. Every servant in the house was whispering about the poor, humiliated bride. Instead, she found Charlotte standing at the window, perfectly composed, looking out at the frozen garden. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Mrs. Reed asked gently. "Yes, one thing," Charlotte said. "The locked cabinet in the drawing room. I shall need the key to the top shelf. I have something of my own to place there." Mrs. Reed blinked. "Of course, Your Grace. May I ask, is it valuable? Should I insure it with the silver?" Charlotte turned from the window then, and for just a moment the housekeeper saw something in the new duchess's eyes that she would never forget. Not sadness, not fear. Patience, deep, quiet, unshakable patience, like a woman who knows exactly how a story will end, and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "No, Mrs. Reed," Charlotte said softly, unwrapping a small object from a folded cloth. "You cannot insure this. There is not enough money in England." It was a single porcelain cup. Mrs. Reed caught only a glimpse of it, white and gold, with something painted on the side, before the Duchess wrapped it again. "And Mrs. Reed," Charlotte added, her voice still gentle, "no one touches that shelf. No one. If anyone asks, it is only an old keepsake from a lady I once served." "A lady you served, Your Grace?" Charlotte smiled, a small quiet smile with a whole hidden world behind it. "In a manner of speaking," she said, "good night, Mrs. Reed." And so the cup went onto the highest shelf, behind glass, and the key went onto the chain at Charlotte's waist, where it would stay for 3 long years. Through every cold silence at the dinner table. Through every insult, spoken and unspoken. Through the arrival of a beautiful woman in crimson silk, who would try to take everything Charlotte had. The cup waited, and so did she. Because Charlotte Hale had made a promise to someone whose name would one day make all of London gasp, and a promise made to that asterisk person is never, ever broken. But before the cup, and before the promise, came the mistress. And that is where our story truly begins. There is a special kind of cruelty that leaves no bruises. Edmund never shouted at his wife. He never raised his hand. He did something far colder. He simply decided that she did not exist. At Ashford Hall, the Duchess was treated like a piece of furniture. When Edmund hosted dinners, Charlotte was told through a servant, never to her face, that His Grace prefers you to dine in your rooms. When the great families of London sent invitations addressed to the Duke and Duchess of Ashford *, Edmund attended alone and told everyone his wife was delicate and fond of solitude. Within 6 months, society had its little joke ready. The grey ghost of Ashford Hall, they called her, a duchess no one had ever properly met. Some people whispered that she was sickly. Others said she was simple-minded. Lady Ashcombe, the sharpest tongue in London, said at a card party, "The Duke married a debt, my dears, and one does not take a debt to the opera." And how did Charlotte bear all this? That was the strange thing, the thing the servants could never quite understand. She bore it like a woman who had somewhere else to be. It was Mrs. Reed, the housekeeper, who noticed the first oddity. On the third Thursday of every month without fail, the Duchess left Ashford Hall at dawn in a plain hired carriage. Not the ducal coach with its proud crest on the door. A plain one, the kind any merchant's wife might use. She wore a simple dark dress and a veil, and she took no maid with her. She returned after nightfall, saying only that she had visited a sick relation. Every month the same day, Mrs. Reed murmured to the butler, Mr. Graves, "Rain or snow, well or ill, what sort of sick relation is that exact?" "The sort we do not ask about," said Mr. Graves, who was a wise man. But the servants noticed other things too, small things, things that did not fit the picture of a poor baron's plain daughter. The footman James noticed that letters sometimes arrived for the Duchess, thick, heavy paper, sealed with dark red wax. Once, just once, he caught a glimpse of the seal before she took the letter from the tray. He did not recognize the crest, but he noticed that her Grace's hands, always so calm, closed around that letter the way a soldier's hand closes around an order. She always read those letters alone, and she always burned them afterward, in the small fireplace in her room, stirring the ashes until nothing remained. The young maid, Betsy, noticed something else. One night, bringing up warm milk, she found the Duchess at her writing desk long past midnight, working by candlelight. Pages and pages, covered in fine handwriting. "Beg pardon, Your Grace," Betsy stammered. "I didn't know you were awake." "It is quite all right, Betsy," Charlotte said, calmly turning the top page face down. "Set it by the fire, thank you." But Betsy had already seen. The letters were not in English. One page was in French. Another, in what she later learned, was German. And at the top of one sheet, before it was turned over, Betsy could have sworn she saw words that made no sense at all for a forgotten duchess in a cold West Wing. "Madam, as you requested, I have made the inquiries in Vienna." Betsy told Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed told her to hold her tongue. But that night the old housekeeper lay awake, thinking about the locked top shelf in the drawing room and the little cup that could not be insured, and the lady the Duchess had once served. "Who are you, madam?" she thought, "and what in heaven's name are you doing in this unhappy house?" Edmund, of course, noticed nothing. He was too busy performing, because that is what his life had become, a grand, exhausting performance of wealth he did not have. Charlotte's dowry had quietly paid the worst of his father's debts just as the contract promised, but Edmund had learned nothing. The parties continued, the horses, the tailors, the wine. A duke must be seen to shine, he told himself, and shining is expensive. Mr. Finch, the lawyer, came to him that spring with worried eyes. "Your Grace, the accounts. We are spending faster than the estate earns. If this continues, in 2 or 3 years we shall be back where we started, perhaps if the household economized." "Economized?" Edmund's voice was ice. "Shall I sell my carriage and walk to Parliament, Finch? Shall I wear last season's coat like a country squire? I am the Duke of Ashford." "Of course, Your Grace, I only meant—" "There is money in the world, Finch, rivers of it. A man of my name merely has to stand in the right place, and it flows to him. He believed it, too. That was the tragedy of Edmund of Ashford. He truly believed that his name was a fortress that nothing could ever breach. He was standing in that fortress, admiring its walls, and he never once saw the two shadows moving toward his life. One shadow was coming to save him. She was already inside the walls, quiet as snow, keeping her strange midnight letters and her third Thursdays and her locked cup. The other shadow was coming to destroy him, and she was almost here. It was the Dowager Countess Whitmore, who threw the stone into the still water. The old countess lived on the neighboring estate, 80 years old, sharp as a needle, rich as sin, and far too grand and too ancient to care what anyone thought of her. She had known 4 kings, buried 2 husbands, and terrified 3 generations of London society. And she was the only person of rank who ever came to see Charlotte. The first visit had been curiosity. The old lady wanted to inspect the ghost duchess for herself. She arrived unannounced one gray afternoon and found Charlotte in the small west parlor, reading. They took tea. They spoke of the weather, of books, of nothing at all. But the Dowager Countess had spent 60 years around courts and palaces, and she saw what dukes and footmen could not. She saw how Charlotte poured tea with a formal, old-fashioned grace that was not taught in the country. She saw how Charlotte, without thinking, served her guest according to the strictest rules of royal precedence. And when the Countess deliberately made a small error about a foreign court, naming the wrong Archduchess of Austria, she saw the young Duchess open her mouth to correct her, and then, very smoothly, stop herself. The old lady set down her cup and looked at Charlotte for a long moment. "You know, my dear," she said at last, "I have met every noblewoman in England and half of Europe besides, and I find I cannot place you at all, which is very odd, because your manners come from a room I have only entered a handful of times in my long life, and there are no barons in it." Charlotte's face did not change, but she set down her own cup, and the 2 women looked at each other in silence. "You are mistaken, my lady," Charlotte said gently. "I am no one, everyone says so." The Dowager Countess began, slowly, to smile. "Ah," she said, "yes, and in my experience, child, when everyone is so very certain a woman is no one, she is usually the most important person in the room." She rose, took up her cane, and paused at the door. "I shall come every week," she announced. "Not out of kindness, out of curiosity. I am old, my dear, and you are the first interesting thing to happen in this county in 20 years. And come she did, every week, through that whole long year. She never asked directly about the third Thursdays, or the burned letters, or the cup behind the glass. She was too clever for that. She simply watched and waited, and grew fonder of the quiet Duchess than she had ever intended to. It was during one of those visits, on a warm evening in June, that the old lady brought the news that would change everything. "Well, my dear," she said, settling into her chair, "London has a new sensation, and I am told she is heading our way. A Mrs. Lavinia Crane, a widow, young and beautiful, with, they say, £40,000 and eyes like a cat. She has taken the Fairfield house for the summer." The Countess snorted. "No one knows her family. No one knows her late husband. No one knows where the money comes from. Naturally, all of London is in love with her." Charlotte refilled the old lady's cup, calm as ever. "And why should that concern us, my lady?" "Because, child," the Countess said, fixing her with those ancient, knowing eyes, "women like that do not take country houses for the fresh air. They come hunting. And the biggest prize in this county," she nodded toward the east wing, where the Duke's laughter could be heard entertaining his friends, "is your husband." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she did something the Dowager Countess did not expect. She smiled, very slightly, the way a chess player smiles when the game finally begins. "Then we must be sure to welcome her," Charlotte said softly, "and watch her very, very closely." The old Countess stared at her, and then burst into delighted, wicked laughter. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, wiping her eyes. "I knew asterisk there was a reason I liked you." Neither of them knew, on that soft June evening, just how dark the game would become, how much Charlotte would be made to suffer before it ended, how close she would come to losing everything, even the roof over her head. But one thing was already certain, though not a soul in England suspected it. Lavinia Crane was coming to hunt a duke. She had no idea that the quiet gray woman in the West Wing had spent her whole life learning to hunt far more dangerous creatures than her. Lavinia Crane did not enter society. She conquered it. Her first appearance was at the midsummer ball at Fairfield, the very house she had rented for the season. She invited 200 people, and 200 people came, because everyone wanted to see the mysterious widow with £40,000. And oh, she gave them a show. She appeared at the top of the staircase in a gown of deep crimson silk, a bold color, scandalous color for a widow, with diamonds at her throat and not a trace of mourning about her. She was perhaps 30, with black hair, white skin and green eyes that moved around a room the way a jeweler's eyes move over a tray of gems, weighing, measuring, pricing. "Good heavens," whispered Lady Ashcombe behind her fan. "Who wears crimson to her own introduction?" "A woman," said the Dowager Countess Whitmore dryly, "who wants every man in the room to forget she was ever anyone's wife." And it worked. Within an hour, half the gentlemen of the county were in love. Lavinia laughed at their jokes, remembered their names, admired their waistcoats. She had a gift, a rare, dangerous gift, for making every man feel like the cleverest, most fascinating creature on earth. But her green eyes kept drifting, all evening, toward one man. The tallest man in the room, the proudest, the one with the ancient name and the great gray house on the hill. The Duke of Ashford. Edmund had come alone, as always. And as always, he was performing, laughing a little too loudly, spending imaginary money a little too freely. Lavinia watched him for 1 full hour before she made her move. And here is what no one in that ballroom understood. She was not looking at his handsome face, or his broad shoulders, or his famous name. She was looking at his boots, expensive, but resoled twice. At his rings, one of which, she noted, had quietly disappeared since a portrait painted 2 years ago. At the way his laughter tightened whenever the card tables were mentioned. Lavinia Crane could read a man in debt the way a hawk reads a field mouse. It was, one might say, her profession. "There you are, she thought, and smiled into her champagne. A proud, hungry, foolish duke, rattling around in a great empty fortune. Perfect." She did not approach him. That was her genius. She arranged to be introduced to the gentleman standing next to him, laughed at that gentleman's dull joke as if it were the wit of the age, and then turned to leave, letting her gaze sweep past Edmund with polite, devastating indifference. Edmund of Ashford had never in his life been looked at with indifference. He was introduced to her within 10 minutes. He requested a dance within 20. And by the end of the evening he was telling her about his horses, his estate, his plans, while she gazed up at him as though a god had come down to speak with her. "You must find us all terribly dull, Mrs. Crane, after the great world," he said. "Dull?" Her green eyes went wide. "Your Grace, I have dined in Paris and Vienna, and I promise you I have not had a conversation this interesting in years." It was a lie so smooth, so warm, so perfectly shaped to fit the hole in Edmund's vanity that he swallowed it whole. The hook was in. The whispers reached Ashford Hall within a week. The Duke's carriage seen at Fairfield 3 times. The Duke and Mrs. Crane riding together in the East Meadow. The Duke ordering new coats from London. The servants moved through the house with lowered eyes, ashamed for their mistress. Betsy the maid wept angry little tears in the kitchen. "It isn't right," she burst out. Her grace never did anything but bear it all quiet-like, and now this creature. "Hush," said Mrs. Reed, but her own hands were trembling as she polished the silver. "And the Duchess?" The Duchess asked Mrs. Reed a strange question. It was on a Tuesday morning in the still room, while they reviewed the household accounts. Charlotte set down her pen and said, quite calmly, as if asking about the weather, "Mrs. Reed, this Mrs. Crane. I am told she has taken Fairfield for the whole season with 12 servants and given a ball for 200. Tell me, you know every tradesman in this county. Has she paid them?" Mrs. Reed blinked. "Paid them, Your Grace. The butcher, the wine merchant, the florist who did the midsummer ball, have their bills been settled or only promised?" Mrs. Reed didn't know. But Mrs. Reed's sister was married to the Fairfield grocer, and within 3 days the Duchess had her answer. Not one bill had been paid. Not one. The richest widow in England, the woman with £40,000, was living entirely on credit and charm. Charlotte received this news in silence. Then she went to her writing desk, took out a fresh sheet of paper, and began a letter in French. Betsy, laying the fire, caught only the first line before the Duchess's hand covered the page. But the first line was enough to keep the girl awake all night, turning it over and over. "Madam, I believe I have found the woman we lost in Vienna." The Dowager Countess came on Thursday, as always, and this time she did not bother with the weather. "Well," she said, thumping her cane against the floor as she sat, "it is all over the county. He dined at Fairfield twice this week. He has bought her a mare. A mare when his own wife walks to church. My dear girl, this has gone past whispering. In a month it will be open scandal, and in 2, that crimson cat will be sitting in your parlor giving orders to your servants." "Yes," said Charlotte, pouring the tea, "I expect she will." The old lady stared at her. "You expect she will. Child, do you understand what I am telling you? I have seen this play before 100 times in every court in Europe. The wife who does nothing is the wife who ends up in a cold dower house while the mistress wears her jewels. You have friends, you know. I am not without teeth. One word from me and half of society would shut its doors to that woman. Why will you not fight?" For a moment Charlotte was quiet. Outside they could hear hoofbeats, Edmund, riding out again toward Fairfield. Then Charlotte set down the teapot and looked at the old Countess, and the old Countess saw something in those calm brown eyes that she had not seen before, something that made her sit very still. "My lady," Charlotte said softly, "when you hunt a wolf, and the wolf walks into your forest of its own free will, do you shout and wave your arms and frighten it away?" The Countess's teacup stopped halfway to her lips. "Or," Charlotte went on, gently turning her own cup upon its saucer, "do you stay very quiet and let it come all the way in?" Silence. The clock ticked. Somewhere below a door closed. "Good God," the Dowager Countess said at last very slowly, "you no her." "I know of her," said Charlotte. "I have been waiting some years to be sure. This week I became sure." She lifted her tea and took a small, calm sip. "She has worn 3 names that I am aware of. Crane is the 4th. The last man who loved her lost everything he had and is in a debtor's prison in Brussels. The man before that shot himself in a hunting lodge outside Vienna, and his family put it about as an accident." The old lady had gone quite pale. "And your husband?" "Is a proud, foolish, unkind man," Charlotte said evenly, "who has humiliated me for 3 years and is about to hand everything he owns to a criminal." She set down her cup. "And he is also my husband and Ashford is my house and I do not intend to lose either of them to Lavinia Crane." "Then in heaven's name, girl, expose her. Now tonight I'll help you." But Charlotte shook her head slowly. "Not yet. If I strike now with half proof, she will simply vanish as she vanished from Vienna and from Brussels and reappear in a year in another county with a 5th name, hunting some other fool. No, my lady. And here the Duchess's quiet voice took on an edge the old woman had never heard in it, the flat, cold certainty of someone giving orders that would be obeyed. This time she has walked into my forest. This time she does not leave it. I will wait until her hands are so deep in the trap that she cannot pull them out, however long it takes, whatever it costs me. The Dowager Countess sat back in her chair and let out a long, long breath. You know, she said finally, for 3 years I have been trying to work out who you are. I have a new theory now. Lo, I no longer think you are hiding from something, my dear. The old lady's eyes glittered. I think you were stationed here. Charlotte only smiled and offered her more tea. But here is the truth of it, the truth that matters for our story. Charlotte had a plan, yes. Charlotte had patience and knowledge and powerful friends in places no one imagined. What Charlotte did not have, what she could not have, was any idea of just how much that plan would cost her. She thought she was prepared to be humiliated. She was not prepared for how artfully Lavinia Crane could humiliate. She thought she knew how cold her husband could be. She had not yet seen him truly cruel. And she thought that quiet Thursday afternoon that she had walked through the worst of it already, 3 years of silence and shame, and that the road ahead, however hard, led upward. She was wrong. The road led down through insults she had not imagined, down through an accusation that would brand her a thief, down to a locked door in the oldest, coldest wing of the house, and to one terrible winter evening when she would stand before her own writing desk, take out one final sheet of paper, and write just 3 words to the most powerful person in England. But we are not there yet. First, the wolf had to enter the forest. And in the first week of September, wearing crimson silk and a triumphant smile, Lavinia Crane came to dine at Ashford Hall. The first dinner was only the beginning. Lavinia Crane arrived at Ashford Hall that September evening on the Duke's own arm, and from the moment she crossed the threshold, she behaved not like a guest, but like a woman inspecting a house she intended to buy. Charlotte received her at the door, as a duchess must, and Lavinia performed her first small cruelty right there, in front of the servants. "Your Grace," she said, taking Charlotte's hand, and then instead of the proper curtsy owed to a duchess, she gave only the smallest, laziest bend of the knee, the kind one might offer a vicar's wife. "How sweet to finally meet you. Edmund has told me so little about you." Edmund, his Christian name, spoken in front of the whole household, warm and familiar as a kiss. Betsy, standing with the other servants, felt her fingernails cut into her palms. But the Duchess only inclined her head. "Welcome to Ashford Hall, Mrs. Crane. I hope you will find everything to your satisfaction." "Oh," said Lavinia, her green eyes already sliding past Charlotte to the marble staircase, the paintings, the silver. "I'm sure I shall." That autumn the visits became weekly, then twice weekly. Then Lavinia stopped waiting to be invited at all. And with every visit she pushed a little further, always smiling, always charming, always with Edmund's blind blessing. In October, she decided the blue drawing room was gloomy, and had it redone in gold and crimson, her colors, without one word to the mistress of the house. Charlotte returned from church one Sunday to find her grandmother's chairs carried off to the attic and strange men hanging scarlet curtains. "Mrs. Crane thought it wanted brightening," Edmund said, not even looking up from his newspaper. "She has exquisite taste. You might learn from her." In November, Lavinia began giving orders to the servants directly. Small things at first, her tea served just so, the fires built higher, the good carriage sent to fetch her. The servants looked to Charlotte in silent agony, and Charlotte, to their bewilderment, nodded gently. "Do as she says." "But Your Grace," Mrs. Reed whispered one evening, nearly in tears, "if we obey her like a mistress of this house, then by Christmas she'll be the mistress of this house, and everyone will know it." Yes, Charlotte said quietly. She will believe exactly that, let her. She laid her hand briefly over the housekeeper's. Mrs. Reed, I know what I am asking of you all. I ask you to trust me a little longer. Every order she gives, every liberty she takes, I want it seen asterisk. I want witnesses. Do you understand? Let her write her confession one command at a time. Mrs. Reed didn't fully understand, but she looked into her mistress's steady eyes and she chose to believe. Below stairs, a quiet word spread among the servants. Endure, watch, remember. Her Grace has a plan. They became, without knowing it, an army of witnesses. But then came December, and the brooch. It happened at the Christmas dinner. The first great dinner Edmund had given in years, 20 guests at the long table, and Lavinia Crane seated, scandalously, at the Duke's right hand, while the Duchess sat far away at the other end. Charlotte wore, as she did every Christmas, the only piece of jewelry anyone had ever seen on her, a small brooch of gold and pearl, shaped like a sprig of forget-me-nots. It was modest, old-fashioned, certainly not worth a tenth of the diamonds at Lavinia's throat. It had belonged to Charlotte's mother, who had died when Charlotte was 9 years old. It was, in all the world, the single thing the Duchess truly owned. Halfway through dinner, Lavinia's green eyes found it. "What a asterisk charming little brooch, Your Grace," she called down the table, her voice bright with wine and triumph. "How quaint, forget-me-nots. My grandmother had one just like it." "Thank you," Charlotte said. "It was my mother's." "Was it? How touching." Lavinia turned to Edmund and her voice turned to honey. "Edmund, darling, I've just had the most wonderful thought. My gown for the 12th night ball is exactly that shade of blue. Your Grace," she turned back to Charlotte, and 20 guests heard what came next. "You simply must lend it to me. You wear it so seldom, after all, and it would look so well on me." The table went quiet. Everyone understood what was happening. This was not about a brooch. This was a public test of power. The mistress demanding the wife's most precious possession in front of society to see if anyone would stop her. Everyone looked at the Duke. And the Duke, his face flushed with wine and pride, desperate to please the woman who kept whispering to him about a golden investment that would solve everything, the Duke laughed. "Of course she'll lend it. Charlotte, don't be dull. Send it over to Fairfield in the morning." For one long moment, Charlotte looked down the length of that glittering table, at her husband's careless face, at Lavinia's smiling, watchful, cat-green eyes. Every guest held their breath. The Dowager Countess Whitmore, seated in the middle, had gone rigid with fury, her old hand white on her fork, waiting, praying for the Duchess to finally refuse. Charlotte reached up, unpinned her mother's brooch, and looked at it for a moment in her open palm. "There is no need to wait until morning," she said. She rose, walked the length of the table in perfect silence, and laid the brooch beside Lavinia's plate. "Things of real value," she said softly, to Lavinia, but somehow to the whole room, always find their way home in the end. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Crane." Then she returned to her seat and calmly took up her spoon. The guests would remember it for years, though they would only understand it much, much later. At the time, they saw a broken wife surrendering. Only 2 people at that table saw something else. The Dowager Countess, who saw the Duchess's hand perfectly steady. And for just a flicker of a second, Lavinia Crane herself. Because as she picked up her prize, her eyes met Charlotte's down the length of the table, and something in that calm brown gaze sent, for the first time in her long and wicked career, a small, cold needle of doubt straight through her heart. She should be crying, Lavinia thought. Why isn't she crying? Then Edmund refilled her glass, and the doubt drowned in champagne. It was 3 nights later that Charlotte saw the stranger. She had not been sleeping well, whatever her plan, whatever her patience. She was still a woman whose mother's brooch now sat in another woman's jewel box, and some nights the armor grew heavy. So she was awake, past 2 in the morning, standing at her dark window with a cold cup of tea. That is why she saw it. A man coming out of the side door of the east guest wing, the wing where Lavinia now stayed, when the weather made the drive to Fairfield unwise, which was somehow every week. He moved like a man who did not wish to be seen, keeping to the shadow of the yew hedge, and at the gate a plain carriage waited with its lamps put out. Charlotte stood very still. She had seen the man before, twice in fact, a narrow, respectable-looking person in lawyer's black with silver spectacles. Lavinia had introduced him at dinner as my dear cousin, Mr. Pole. He manages my late husband's affairs. He had bowed, spoken little, and been forgotten by everyone. But everyone had not spent their life where Charlotte had spent hers. Because here is what Charlotte had noticed at that dinner, filed away, and said nothing about. When the roast was served, Mr. Pole, this modest cousin, this humble man of business, had without thinking been served first by Lavinia's own hand, before the titled guests. And Lavinia Crane, who calculated every breath she took, did not make mistakes of precedence. Unless it was not a mistake, unless it was a habit, the habit of a woman serving the true master of the enterprise. Not her cousin Charlotte thought, watching the dark figure slip through the gate, not her lawyer, her commander. The carriage rolled away without lamps, and Charlotte let the curtain fall. She crossed to her writing desk, lit a single candle, and took out paper. For a long moment she sat still, ordering her thoughts. Then she began to write, in German this time, and the first line read: "There are 2 of them. The game is larger than we believed." She wrote for an hour. Then she sealed the letter, held the wax to the candle, and pressed into it a small seal that she kept, not on her desk with the household seals, but on a ribbon around her neck, hidden beneath her nightgown. A seal that no servant, no husband, no living soul at Ashford Hall had ever seen. If Betsy the maid had been there, if she had glimpsed the tiny image pressed into that red wax, she would not have slept for a week. But no one saw, no one ever saw. Charlotte set the letter for the morning post under a book, blew out the candle, and stood a moment in the darkness, looking out toward the east wing, where her enemy slept in silk sheets, wearing her mother's brooch, dreaming of a duchy. "Take your time, Mrs. Crane," the Duchess said softly to the darkness. "Take everything you like, take it all." A pause. The winter moon slid out from behind a cloud. "It will make such a lovely trail of evidence." But even as she spoke those words, Charlotte made a mistake, the only real mistake she would make in this whole long game. And it was this. She believed the trap was hers alone. She did not yet know that Lavinia and the quiet Mr. Pole had begun to lay a trap of their own. A trap not for the Duke's money, that was already half won, but for the one person at Ashford Hall whose calm brown eyes had begun to worry them. A trap made of a missing necklace, a servant's bribed testimony, and a lie so poisonous it could put even a duchess out in the snow. It was waiting for her just weeks ahead. And this time, Charlotte would not see it coming. In the second week of January, the answers began to arrive. They came quietly, the way everything in Charlotte's hidden life came, in plain envelopes in a merchant's hand, addressed to Mrs. C. Hale, care of the Whitmore estate. For the Dowager Countess was now fully in the game, and her house had become Charlotte's post office. The 2 women sat by the old lady's fire on a snowy Thursday afternoon, and Charlotte read the letters aloud, one by one, and with each one the room seemed to grow colder. The first letter came from Brussels. Her name there was Madame Lisette Corbeau, Charlotte read. A widow, always a widow, with a fortune in Antwerp diamonds that no one ever quite saw. She attached herself to a Monsieur de Veru, a silk merchant. Within a year he had signed his warehouses over to a joint venture that existed only on paper. When it collapsed, the papers showed his signature and hers was nowhere. He is in the debtor's prison at Vilvoorde. She had vanished. The second letter came from Vienna, and Charlotte's voice grew quieter as she read it. Her name there was Frau Lena Kraus. The gentleman was a Count von Riesing, a widower with 2 young daughters. She was to marry him. 3 days before the wedding, he discovered that the investments she had guided him into were forgeries, and that his estate was mortgaged to a man he had never met, a lawyer, small, with silver spectacles. The Dowager Countess drew a sharp breath. The cousin, Mr. Pole. In Vienna he was called Herr Fall, Charlotte said. In Brussels, Monsieur Poda, Pole Fall Poda. She looked up. It all means the same word, my lady. In every language he names himself the same thing, the stake asterisk, the post you tie the animal to. She set the letter down. The Count von Riesing took his hunting gun into the woods that December. His family called it an accident. His daughters went to an aunt in Salzburg. For a long moment neither woman spoke. The fire crackled. Outside the snow came down on the white lawns. 2 men, the old countess said at last softly, one buried, one in prison, and this creature sleeps in your guest wing and wears your mother's brooch. Her old hand trembled on her cane, and for once it was not age. Charlotte, what are they planning for your husband? The same play, 3rd performance, Charlotte said. I have seen the shape of it for weeks. Lavinia whispers to Edmund about a golden opportunity, a canal company in the north, guaranteed by friends of her late husband. The returns she promises are impossible. The papers, when they come, will be prepared by Mr. Pole. Edmund believes the investment will save him. In truth, somewhere in that stack of documents, dressed in lawyer's language too dull to read, there will be a page that pledges Ashford itself, the house, the land, everything as security. He will sign it with the rest. He signs whatever she puts before him now. Then warn him. Warn him, Charlotte smiled, the saddest smile the old lady had ever seen on her. My lady, 3 weeks ago I tried in the only way left to me. I asked him gently at breakfast whether he had shown the canal papers to Mr. Finch, his own lawyer. He put down his cup and looked at me the way one looks at a stain on the tablecloth. And then he said, "It astonishes me that a woman who brought nothing to this house but her father's debts feels entitled to opinions about my fortune." The Countess closed her eyes. He is not a man who can be warned, my lady. He is a man who must be saved, the way one saves a drowning swimmer who fights you, from behind, at the last moment, whether he deserves it or not. And does he deserve it? The old lady asked quietly. Charlotte was silent for a moment, looking into the fire. There is a boy in him, she said at last. Under all that pride and cruelty, a boy whose father gambled and lied and taught him that a duke must glitter or die. I saw that boy once in the first month of our marriage. He stood in the picture gallery in front of his father's portrait. He thought he was alone, and he said, "I will not end like you." She looked up. He is ending exactly like him, and it terrifies him, and the more terrified he becomes, the crueler. No, my lady, I do not save him because he deserves it. I save him because I gave my word to someone that this house would not fall, and because... She stopped. "Because," said the Countess very gently. "Nothing," said the Duchess, in a voice that meant it was not nothing at all. "More tea, my lady." By the end of January, Charlotte's net was nearly complete. She had the Brussels letters. She had the Vienna letters. She had, through the Countess's banker grandson, proof that Lavinia's £40,000 was a stack of unpaid bills. She had the sworn statement of a Fairfield footman who had carried sealed packets between Mrs. Crane and Mr. Pole at strange hours. The trap only awaited the final piece, the one piece without which all the rest could be shrugged away. Proof that Lavinia Crane, Lisette Corbeau, and Lena Kraus were the same woman. Letters can be doubted, Charlotte explained to the Countess. Descriptions fit 1,000 dark-haired widows. If I accuse her without proof of identity, she weeps, she faints. Edmund throws me from the house, and she finishes her work in peace. I need one witness who has seen her face in another life, or one document with her true name upon it. My friends are searching. It is a matter of weeks. A matter of weeks. But Lavinia Crane had survived 10 years in her profession by smelling danger before she saw it. And ever since Christmas, ever since that steady brown gaze down the dinner table, something about the quiet Duchess had been troubling her sleep. "She watches," Lavinia said to Mr. Pole in the last dark hour of one of his secret visits. "She never weeps, she never rages, she watches. I've bled this house for 5 months and she has not fought me once. Women fight, Pole, even mice fight, unless," her green eyes narrowed, "unless they are waiting for something." Mr. Pole polished his silver spectacles, unhurried. "Then let us give the Duke a reason to remove her," he said, "before whatever she waits for arrives. Something simple, something domestic." He held the spectacles up to the candlelight. "In my experience, nothing removes an inconvenient wife so efficiently as a small theft." It happened on the second Sunday of February. Charlotte had walked to the village church in the morning, alone as always. When she returned, the house was strangely quiet. The servants' eyes were wide and frightened, and in the great hall stood Edmund, Lavinia, and 2 footmen. Lavinia's face was streaked with artful tears. "There she is," Lavinia breathed. "Oh, Edmund, I told you I didn't want to believe it." "What has happened?" Charlotte asked. "What has happened," Edmund said in a voice like frost, "is that Mrs. Crane's emerald necklace has vanished from her room. The room was locked, the window sealed, and Sarah," he gestured, and Charlotte saw, half hidden behind the footman, one of the newer housemaids, pale and unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Sarah has testified that she saw *you*, madam, coming out of that corridor yesterday evening when you had no business there." The hall was utterly silent. A dozen servants stood frozen on the stairs and in the doorways. "I see," Charlotte said quietly, "and you believe I stole a necklace." "What I believe," Edmund said, "is that you have hated Mrs. Crane from the day she entered this house. What I believe is that you are the daughter of a bankrupt nobody, that jealousy is the oldest thief in the world, and that a servant with no reason to lie has placed you at the scene. Give me one reason, madam, one, why I should take your word over the evidence of my own eyes." And there it was. Charlotte looked at her husband, at this proud, blind, frightened man she had spent 3 years protecting from the shadows, and she understood with a cold, falling sensation 3 things all at once. That this trap was Pole's work, and it was flawless. That the maid Sarah had been bought or terrified, and would not break. And that anything she said now, any defense, any truth, any hint of what she knew would only warn her enemies that she was more than a jealous wife. Weeks from the final proof. Weeks from springing her own trap. If she fought now, she lost everything. If she stayed silent, she would be branded a thief in her own house. The Duchess of Ashford stood in her great cold hall, in her plain church dress, with every eye upon her, and made the hardest choice of her long, hidden war. She chose silence. "I have no reason to give you," she said, "that you are able to hear." Edmund's face darkened with something that might, in a better man, have been the last flicker of doubt fighting to live. Lavinia saw it too and moved instantly to kill it. She swayed, pressed her handkerchief to her lips, and whispered, "Edmund, please, I can't bear a scandal, for her sake, be merciful." "Merciful? You will keep to the old north wing," Edmund told his wife, "until I decide what is to be done with you. You will take your meals there. You will receive no visitors. Your keys." He held out his hand, and Charlotte, after one long moment, unclasped the housekeeper's chain from her waist, with its keys to the linen rooms, the still room, the cellars, the locked glass cabinet in the drawing room. But here is what no one noticed, no one except old Mrs. Reed, watching with her heart breaking from the shadow of the stairs. There had always been one small key on a separate ribbon, and that ribbon was no longer on the chain. Charlotte laid the keys in her husband's open hand, curtsied to him, a perfect, formal, devastating curtsy, the first she had ever given him, and walked alone up the great staircase toward the cold north wing, her back straight, while Lavinia Crane watched her go with glittering green eyes and a small, hidden smile of victory. The mistress of Ashford Hall had fallen. That night in her new, freezing room by the light of one candle, Charlotte sat down and for the first time in 3 years, did not write to anyone. She simply looked out at the dark, and at the snow beginning to fall, and whispered a question to which she had no answer. What if the proof comes too late? The north wing of Ashford Hall had been closed for 40 years. It was the oldest part of the house, stone floors, narrow windows, chimneys that smoked. The furniture stood under dust sheets like a room full of ghosts. This was where the Duke sent his wife, in the coldest week of February, on the word of a bribed housemaid and a weeping mistress. The story ran through the county in 3 days and through London in 5. It grew as it traveled, the way poison always does. The Duchess of Ashford caught stealing. The Duchess locked away. They say the Duke will seek an annulment. Well, what can one expect? Blood tells, my dear. She was never really one of us. The invitation stopped. Not that many had ever come. But now even the vicar's wife crossed the lane rather than pass the Ashford gates. The grey ghost had become something worse than invisible. She had become guilty asterisk. And the great irony, the irony that would make all of London blush with shame within the month, was this. The only people in England who knew the truth were servants. Betsy, who smuggled hot bricks and decent food up the north stairs every night, risking her position with every trip. Mrs. Reed, who flatly informed the Duke that if her Grace was to be imprisoned, then her Grace would at least have clean linen and a fire, or your Grace may have my notice along with my keys. Old Graves, the butler, who took to standing guard at the foot of the north stairs in the evenings, so that a certain green-eyed guest could never go up to gloat unobserved. An army of witnesses, keeping faith in the dark. She sits by the window mostly, Betsy whispered to Mrs. Reed in the kitchen. Calm as ever, but Mrs. Reed, she's waiting for a letter. Every day when I bring the tray, there's one moment, just one, when she asks if any post has come. And every day I say no. And every day, for just a second, before she smiles at me and says, "Thank you, Betsy." The girl's voice broke. She looks like a soldier hearing the guns come closer. The letter Charlotte was waiting for finally came in the last week of February. The Dowager Countess brought it herself. Barred from the house by the Duke's orders, the old lady had simply arrived at the servants' entrance in her plainest cloak, walked past the astonished kitchen staff with her cane striking the flagstones like gunshots, and climbed the north stairs unannounced, daring anyone alive to stop her. But when Charlotte opened the letter from Vienna, the one that was to hold her final proof, the old lady watched the Duchess's steady hands go still. "Read it to me," the Countess said quietly. Charlotte read it in a level voice, which somehow made it worse. Madam, with a heavy heart, the valet of the late Count von Riesing, the one man who could swear to the woman's face in an English court of law, was found dead in his lodgings in the Leopoldstadt on the 9th of this month. The physicians say his heart failed. Perhaps it did. But his rooms had been searched and the Count's letters which he kept are gone. Someone reached him before us. Madam, whoever these people are, they are watching their own trail. Take the greatest care. The fire hissed. Snow tapped at the narrow window. Pole, the Countess said at last, her voice gray. Pole, Charlotte agreed. She folded the letter with great precision, as if neatness could hold something inside her that wanted very much to break. 10 years of hunting, my lady. 2 ruined men, 1 dead valet, and a trail swept clean behind them across half of Europe. There is no witness left. There is no document. There is no proof of who she is, and there never will be. For the first time in 3 years, the old lady heard something in the young woman's voice that frightened her. Not tears. Something quieter than tears. Then it is over, the Countess said. No, said Charlotte. It is worse than over. Listen to me. She turned from the window, and her face in the candlelight was pale and exact. Yesterday Betsy carried down a tray from the study and brought me back what she saw there. The canal papers have come. 40 pages, tied with green ribbon, waiting on my husband's desk. Mr. Pole arrives Friday next to assist with the signing. And on the same Friday, and here at last, her voice bent just once like a blade under too much weight, my husband will hold an afternoon tea for 40 guests to present Mrs. Crane to the county in my house, in my drawing room, in front of everyone who has spent this month calling me a thief. And I am commanded to attend. His message was quite precise. You will attend and you will serve the tea so that society may see that order has been restored at Ashford and that you accept your place in it. The Dowager Countess rose from her chair, and 80 years of iron control failed her all at once. Serve a duchess pouring tea for that procuress, while she sits smiling in your chair with your husband in front of the whole county. The old lady was actually shaking. It is not humiliation, Charlotte. It is an execution. He is inviting society to watch you die politely. And an hour after the last cup is poured, he will walk into his study and sign away Ashford to her, and there is nothing left to stop it. Silence. And then Charlotte said, very quietly, there is one thing left. Something in her tone made the old lady turn. The Duchess had drawn out the thin ribbon that she wore always around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. On it hung the small key that had never been on the housekeeper's chain, and something else, something the Countess had never seen, a tiny seal of gold and ivory. My lady, Charlotte said, you asked me once who I am. I could not answer then. I cannot fully answer now, the promise is not mine alone to break. But I will tell you this much, because Friday you will see it with your own eyes, and I would not have the shock stop that fierce old heart of yours. The Countess sat down slowly, without taking her eyes from her. There is a lady, Charlotte said, the highest in this land, who once suffered a grief so private that history will never record it. Her sister was dying slowly of a long illness in a quiet house away from the world, and she could not be seen to visit as often as her heart demanded, for the world watches her every carriage. So she required someone with no name worth noticing, no ambitions worth fearing, no tongue that would ever wag. Someone to sit with a dying woman through 2 long years of nights, to read to her, write for her, hold her hand at the end, and then to vanish back into nothing, as if none of it had happened. The candle flame stood perfectly still. I was 17 when I was chosen. I will not tell you how or by whom. I was 22 when the lady we cared for died at 4 in the morning in the winter, holding my hand because her sister could not that night be there. And the great lady came at dawn, too late, and found me still holding it. And she wept. I will say no more of that. But when she had done weeping, she took from her sister's own breakfast service a single cup, and she put it in my hands, and she said words I have carried through every cold day in this house. Charlotte's eyes were bright now, but her voice never wavered. She said, you have served in silence, so I cannot honor you in daylight, not yet, but keep this where you can see it. And if the hour ever comes when the world stands against you, show it. Wherever you are, however far, show it, and you will learn what my gratitude weighs. The Dowager Countess Whitmore, who had known 4 kings, who had buried 2 husbands, who had not been surprised by anything since the fall of the Bastille, sat in the cold north wing of Ashford Hall with tears running freely down her ancient face. The cup, she whispered, the cup in the drawing-room cabinet, dear God in heaven, 3 years I have taken tea 10 feet away from, she stopped. Her head came up. But Charlotte, child, if you have carried such a thing all this time, why the letters, the searching, the years of patience? You could have ended all of this with one. Because it is not mine to spend, Charlotte said simply. Don't you see? It was given for my darkest hour, and I have never counted my own suffering dark enough. I meant to defeat that woman with evidence, my lady, with law, with her own crimes, not with borrowed majesty. A gift like that can be shown only once, and I swore to myself I would never. She stopped. Through the frost-white window, far below, they could both see it, Edmund and Lavinia, walking arm in arm along the terrace through the falling snow, laughing. Behind them, at a respectful distance, came a narrow man in black, silver spectacles catching the winter light. A leather case of documents under his arm arrived early, to prepare the papers that would end 400 years of Ashford. Charlotte watched them for a long moment. "But it seems," she said softly, "that my darkest hour has a date now. Friday, 4 o'clock, tea for 40. She sat down at the small writing desk, the only furniture she had asked to be carried up to the north wing, and drew out a single sheet of paper. No cipher this time. No French, no German. 3 words in that elegant, practiced hand. She folded it, lit the wax, and pressed into it the little seal of gold and ivory, the seal no living soul at Ashford had ever seen. Then she held it out to the old lady. "Your grandson rides to London tonight if you'll ask him. This goes to the address I will whisper to you, to no other hands, and he is to say nothing, only bow and give it over. They will know the seal." The Dowager Countess took the letter as if she were being handed a lit fuse, and she could not help herself. No one alive could have helped it. She turned it to the candlelight and read the 3 words through the thin paper. "It is time." Down on the terrace, Lavinia Crane laughed her silver laugh, and squeezed the Duke's arm and glanced up, just once, at the dark windows of the north wing, with the satisfied eyes of a cat who has left a mouse safely crippled behind her. She saw only darkness and frost. She had 4 days left to enjoy it. And so we return at last to where our story began. Friday, 4 o'clock. The drawing room of Ashford Hall, gold and crimson now, remade in another woman's colors. 40 guests drawn by invitations they could not refuse and by a curiosity they were ashamed of. The whole county knew what this afternoon was. It was not a tea. It was a coronation and an execution. Lavinia Crane sat enthroned at the center of it all in crimson silk, Charlotte's mother's brooch pinned deliberately, visibly, at her breast. Beside her stood the Duke, glittering and loud, a man who believed that by sunset his debts would be dead and buried. In the corner, quiet as furniture, sat a narrow man in black, silver spectacles flashing, a leather case resting on his knees like a sleeping animal. And by the door in gray stood the Duchess. She had been made to enter last, unannounced, like a servant. The guests could hardly bear to look at her. Lady Ashcombe studied her fan. Colonel Hastings studied the carpet. Only one person in that room looked straight at her, a very old lady with fierce eyes, seated in the second row, whose hands were folded tightly on the head of her cane as if in prayer. Edmund let the room settle, then savoring it he turned. "Charlotte, you will serve the tea. Miss Crane takes hers with lemon." The gasp, the frozen faces, the silence like a held breath. "You know this moment. You have been waiting for it as she was." Charlotte did not cry. She did not tremble. She rose, smoothed her plain gray dress, and walked, calm and unhurried, toward the tall glass cabinet at the end of the room. Lavinia leaned back in her chair to enjoy the performance, turning the little brooch at her breast with one lazy finger. This was her masterpiece. By nightfall the papers would be signed. Within a season the annulment. Within a year, all of it, the house, the name, the man, whatever pieces of him were worth keeping. She watched the Duchess pass the tea service on the middle shelf. She watched her draw a thin ribbon from around her neck and a small key. She watched her unlock the highest shelf, the one shelf in the house that had never opened, and her smile flickered just slightly, like a candle in a draught. "What is this?" Charlotte lifted down a single cup and saucer of white porcelain, old and fine, with a band of gold worn soft by loving use. She carried it across the room through absolute silence, every neck craning, every fan stilled, and set it down gently before Lavinia Crane. "You take it with lemon, I believe," the Duchess said. And that is when the Dowager Countess Whitmore looked into that cup at close range, and her saucer slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Now the old lady knew the story. She had wept over it in the North Wing 4 days before, but hearing a thing and seeing it are different countries. For the Dowager Countess had been presented at court as a girl of 16, 64 years ago, and she had taken breakfast, once, terrified, honored beyond speech, with a young princess whose private china bore a design no other set in the world was permitted to carry, a wreath of forget-me-nots about a small crowned monogram. Forget-me-nots, the same flower the guests would realize later that Charlotte's mother's brooch wore. Some things run deeper than coincidence, but that is a thread for our epilogue. The old lady rose from her chair, white as paper, and her voice cracked across the silent room. It cannot be. She pointed one trembling, ancient finger at the cup. I have seen that service twice in my life, and both times inside the walls of a royal palace. That is the private china of a princess of the blood, God rest her sweet soul, and it is never given. It is never given, do you hear me? Except, and here her voice dropped to something between a whisper and a prayer, except by one hand alive, and only for a service beyond price. Every head in the room turned slowly, as in a dream, from the cup, to the Duchess standing calmly beside it. Edmund's face had gone the color of ash. What nonsense is this, Charlotte? Where did you get that cup? It was a gift, said Charlotte. From whom? And precisely then, as if the question had summoned it, came the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel sweep, fast and heavy, and the jingle of harness, and the crunch of many boots. Graves the butler appeared at the drawing-room doors. In 30 years of service, no one had ever seen the old man's composure fail. It failed now. His voice shook like a boy's. Your Grace, my lords, my ladies, he swallowed. A courier from St. James's. The doors opened wide. A royal courier strode in scarlet and gold, mud of the London road still on his boots, the silver greyhound badge of the sovereign's own messengers at his breast. Behind him came a second man, plainly dressed, grey-eyed, unremarkable, the kind of man you would forget at once, which was precisely his profession. And behind them, through the tall windows, the guests could see soldiers in the courtyard, dismounting in the snow. 40 of the finest people in the county rose to their feet by pure instinct. Lavinia Crane rose with them, her face suddenly careful. The courier's gaze swept the room once, past the Duke, past the crimson woman with the diamonds, and stopped on the quiet figure in gray. He bowed deeply, the bow reserved for very few backs in England. I bear a letter, he announced, in a voice trained to fill throne rooms, from Her Majesty the Queen to Her Grace the Duchess of Ashford. He paused and delivered the sentence that broke the county in half. To Her Grace the Duchess of Ashford, Her Majesty's beloved goddaughter. The room did not gasp this time. It was past gasping. Lady Ashcombe sat down abruptly on a chair that was not behind her. Someone's teacup rang against a saucer like a dropped coin. Colonel Hastings said, quite clearly, "Good God," and did not apologize. Goddaughter. The word fell through 3 years of memory like a stone through ice, and everything everyone thought they knew cracked with it. The gray ghost, the debt bride, the woman too dull for the opera, the thief of the North Wing, Her Majesty's beloved goddaughter. Charlotte took the letter. She did not hurry. She broke the great red seal that half the room recognized and the other half feared, read it through once in silence, and then looked up not at the courier, not at her husband, but at the assembled cream of the county who had crossed lanes to avoid her gate. Her Majesty writes, she said, in a clear, quiet voice, to inform me that my request of Monday last has been granted in every particular. She commands me to say that she looks forward to receiving me at the palace on Thursday, as she has received me privately on the 3rd Thursday of every month, these 3 years past. The 3rd Thursday, somewhere at the back Mrs. Reed, listening at the service door with half the household crowded behind her, pressed both hands to her mouth. The sick relation, every month rain or snow, oh my lady, oh my dear lady. And she commands me further, Charlotte continued. And now, for the first time, she turned and looked directly at Lavinia Crane, to present to this company her servant Mr. Marsh. The plain, gray-eyed man stepped forward and made no bow to anyone. Of Her Majesty's Treasury, who has come down from London on a matter of asterisk fraud. The word landed in the crimson and gold room like a musket shot. Fraud, Edmund's voice scraped. What fraud? There is no Marsh Treasury. What the devil is? But Mr. Marsh was not looking at the Duke. Mr. Marsh had the gray, patient eyes of a man who had read every letter from Brussels and Vienna twice, and he was looking with mild professional interest at the narrow man in black, who had risen very quietly from his corner and was moving, unhurried, almost invisible, as he had moved through Vienna, through Brussels, through 10 years and 4 names, toward the far door with his leather case. The exits of this house, Mr. Marsh remarked, to no one in particular in a comfortable voice, have been attended by Her Majesty's men for the past half-hour. There is snow, and it is cold, and my colleagues are of an impatient disposition. He removed his spectacles and polished them, precisely the way Mr. Pole polished his. So I would suggest, sir, that you sit back down. The narrow man stopped. And Lavinia Crane, Lisette Corbeau, Lena Cross, mistress of 10 years of ruin, conqueror of Ashford Hall, stood frozen in the center of the room she had redecorated in her own colors, wearing another woman's brooch before another woman's cup, and understood with the terrible speed of the truly clever exactly how long and how patiently, and by whom she had been hunted. Her green eyes came up and met the Duchess's calm brown ones down the length of the silent room. You, she said softly. Me, said Charlotte. And she picked up the teapot. But before anything else, Mrs. Crane, I was given an instruction, and this house keeps its courtesies. Steam rose, fragrant and gentle, as the Duchess of Ashford, goddaughter of the Queen of England, calmly and gracefully poured tea into a dead princess's cup for the woman who had taken everything from her. Lemon, Charlotte said, I believe. For a moment, nobody in that drawing-room moved. The steam rose from the princess's cup. Lavinia Crane stared down at it as if it were a snake coiled on the saucer. Then Mr. Marsh of Her Majesty's Treasury cleared his throat, drew a folded paper from his coat, and began, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man reading a grocery list, to take the past 10 years apart. Warrants are held, he said, in the matter of a lady traveling under the name of Mrs. Lavinia Crane, widow, known in the city of Brussels in the year 1819 as Madame Lisette Corbeau. He turned the page without haste. Known in the city of Vienna until the winter of 1822 as Frau Lena Cross. With each name, it was as if a layer of paint peeled from the woman in crimson. The guests watched it happen, watched the charming widow of Fairfield dissolve, name by name, into someone none of them had ever met. In Brussels, Marsh went on, the ruin of the merchant Devereux, presently in the debtor's prison at Vilvoorde. In Vienna, the ruin and death of Count von Riesing, leaving 2 orphaned daughters. He looked up mildly. Her Majesty takes a particular interest in the daughters. Her Majesty is a godmother, you understand. She takes godchildren very seriously. Not one person in the room dared to look at the Duke when he said it. And in this county, Marsh continued, an enterprise concerning a certain canal company, the papers for which I believe are in this room. His gray eyes found the leather case, still clutched in the narrow man's hands. Mr. Pole, if that is the name we are using today. The case, if you please. What happened next happened very fast. Mr. Pole did not hand over the case. Mr. Pole spun, with a speed shocking in so gray a man, and hurled the case straight at the fireplace, at the tall flames that had been built up high for the comfort of 40 guests. 10 years of method in one motion. No documents, no crime. The case never reached the fire. Old Graves the butler, 61 years old, 40 of them spent in this house. A man who had stood guard at the foot of the north stairs every evening for a month, took one step from his post beside the mantel and caught it out of the air, the way he had caught cricket balls as a boy on the Ashford lawn. He tucked it under his arm, straightened his coat, and looked at Mr. Pole with the deepest contempt one servant of the realm has ever offered another. "I believe this belongs to the evidence, sir," said Graves. Two of the Queen's men had Mr. Pole by the arms before the room had finished drawing breath, and it was Betsy the maid watching through the crack of the service door, with Mrs. Reed's hands gripping her shoulders, who ever after swore that as they took him, the narrow man looked at Lavinia, and Lavinia looked away, and that, Betsy said, was the exact moment the crimson woman knew she was alone. Marsh opened the case on the tea table in front of everyone and leafed through the canal papers with a professional speed. He stopped at one page, page 31 of 40, dressed in language too dull to read, and turned it toward the Duke. "You are to sign these this evening, Your Grace, I understand. You may wish to know what this page is." Edmund came forward like a sleepwalker. He read it. The room watched the color leave his face and then watched something worse arrive, understanding. "It is a deed of surety," he said hoarsely, "pledging." He had to stop and begin again, "pledging the house and lands of Ashford, entire." "Entire," Marsh agreed pleasantly. "As was done in Vienna, as was done in Brussels. You would have signed away 4 centuries in the time it takes to write your name, Your Grace, while your guests were still finding their carriages." He closed the case with a snap. "Her Majesty instructed me to arrive before the tea concluded. Her Majesty's timing," he added with the ghost of a bow toward Charlotte, "was informed." And now, at last, every eye turned to Lavinia Crane. She had one performance left in her, and she gave it everything. The tears rose on cue, glittering. The handkerchief came out. She swayed toward Edmund with both hands outstretched. "Edmund, my love, you cannot believe. These are asterisk lies asterisk. This is her doing. She has hated me from the first. You know asterisk me." "Madam," said Mr. Marsh in the same comfortable voice, "before you continue, the maid Sarah came to us this morning." The handkerchief stopped. "She was paid £3, Marsh said, and threatened with dismissal without character to say she had seen her Grace in a certain corridor. She has told us where the emerald necklace has been these 3 weeks. He paused. "Sewn into the lining of a crimson traveling cloak, madam, your cloak, packed, which interested us as if for a rapid journey." The silence that followed was the cruelest sound of that whole cruel winter. The county, the same 40 people who had crossed lanes to avoid a thief duchess, looked upon the true thief, and there was nowhere in that gold and crimson room for her to stand. Lavinia understood. She had always been the cleverest person in every room. She understood one heartbeat before everyone else. The tears switched off like a snuffed candle, and for a single extraordinary moment the mask came all the way down, and the guests saw the real face beneath. Intelligent, exhausted, and as cold as a January field. She looked at Charlotte. Not at Edmund. She never once looked at Edmund again, and somehow that told the county everything about what he had truly been to her. 3 years, Lavinia said quietly. It was almost professional courtesy. You watched me for 3 years and you never blinked. I have played this game across half of Europe, Your Grace, against ministers and bankers and spies, and I was beaten by a wife pouring tea. A strange, small, defeated laugh escaped her. "Tell me one thing. When did you know?" "Before you ever reached this county," said Charlotte. "A friend of mine buried the Count von Riesing, Mrs. Crane. I made her a promise over his letters. I keep my promises." The Queen's men stepped forward, and it was then, as they moved to take her, that Lavinia's hand went, by 10 years of instinct, to the little gold and pearl brooch at her breast. One last portable thing of value. "No," said the Duchess of Ashford. One word, the men stopped, the room stopped. Charlotte crossed the floor and stood before her enemy, and held out her open palm, the same palm into which, on a Christmas night, She had unpinned her mother's memory in front of a laughing table. "I told you," she said gently, "that things of real value always find their way home." Lavinia Crane looked at that steady hand for a long moment. Then she unpinned the forget-me-nots and laid them in it, and the guests would argue about this detail for 20 years, but the Dowager Countess always swore it was true, inclined her head to the Duchess. Not a curtsy of respect. The bow one general gives another across a lost battlefield. They led her toward the door, and there, at the threshold of the room she had redecorated in her own colors, in the house she had come within one signature of owning, the Duchess of Ashford spoke her last words to Lavinia Crane, in the same soft, courteous, drawing-room voice with which the whole afternoon had begun. "Your tea is growing cold, Miss Crane." The doors closed. For the space of 5 heartbeats, the drawing-room of Ashford Hall was as silent as it had ever been in 400 years. Then the Dowager Countess Whitmore rose to her feet, 80 years old, tears on her face, absolutely radiant, and struck her cane upon the floor like a judge's gavel. "Well," she announced to the 40 finest people in the county, in a voice that carried to the servants' hall, "I trust we shall all remember this afternoon in precisely the correct manner. Now, I believe her grace was pouring." And the county, shamed, shaken, and desperately grateful to be told what to do, sat down as one body, to take tea with the Queen's goddaughter. All except one man. The Duke of Ashford stood alone by the window where no one had thought to look at him for half an hour, in the middle of his rescued house, his rescued name, his rescued fortune, and discovered that a man can be saved and destroyed in the same afternoon. Every eye that fell on him slid away. Every cup that clinked seemed to toast his shame. The woman he had installed in his wife's place was in a prison coach. The woman he had sent to the North Wing was the goddaughter of the Queen of England, and she had known, she had always known, and she had endured his every cruelty in silence to save him. He watched her across the room, calm among the guests, the brooch pinned back where it belonged, the princess's cup already rinsed and locked away by her own hands, and he understood that there was one reckoning left this day, and that it would be the hardest of all. Because Lavinia Crane had only taken his money. He would have to face the person who had taken his measure. The guests were gone by 6. The Queen's men were gone by 7, and the prison coach with them. By 8 o'clock, Ashford Hall stood silent under the falling snow, and the Duke of Ashford sat alone in his study with a single candle, a cold grate, and the ruins of his own opinion of himself. He had not spoken to his wife. He had tried twice in the emptying drawing-room, had come toward her with words crowding his throat, and both times she had looked at him with those calm brown eyes and the words had died. "What does a man say? Think you was an insult. Forgive me was a beggar's coin against a king's debt." It was the Dowager Countess Whitmore who came to him instead. She entered without knocking, at 8:30, still in her afternoon silks, and stood before his desk leaning on her cane, looking down at him the way one looks at a horse one is deciding not to buy. "Your wife leaves for London on Thursday," she said without preamble. "The Queen has granted her request, all of it." Edmund raised his head slowly. "Her request?" "You heard the courier. Granted in every particular. Did you imagine, boy, that her 3 words to the palace were only about arresting your mistress?" The old lady lowered herself, uninvited, into the chair across from him. "She asked for 3 things. The investigators, you saw that granted. The second, that the truth of the necklace be established publicly so that no shadow remains on her name, you saw that too. And the third." The Countess looked at him for a long moment. "A place at court," she said. "Her Majesty has appointed her to her own household. Her Grace is to have apartments at the palace. She has asked leave, and the Queen has granted it, to come home." The old lady let the word sit there between them. "Home, Edmund. That is the word the letter used. 3 years in this house, and home is a palace she visited one Thursday a month. I want you to sit with that." Edmund sat with it. The candle hissed. The snow ticked against the glass. "Why?" he said at last, and his voice was not a duke's voice at all. "That is the thing I cannot. Why did she do any of it? She had that cup before she ever met me. She had the Queen of England behind her while he could not finish that sentence. Why marry into a bankrupt house? Why endure 3 years of, why save asterisk me? She could have watched it all burn from a palace window." And the Dowager Countess, who had come intending only to scald him, found that she was too old and had seen too much to enjoy it now. So she told him the truth instead, because the truth was worse. "Because of your mother," she said. The Duke went very still. "You never knew her. What were you 4 when the fever took her? 5. But I knew Marion. Everyone loved your mother, Edmund, that is common enough. But one person loved her beyond all the rest, a girl she had grown up beside, summer after summer, when the court came to the waters near here. A princess." The old lady's voice softened despite herself. "They wrote to each other every week of their lives, those two. When your mother died, the princess wore mourning for a year, and the court was told it was for a cousin abroad. And when that princess herself lay dying, nursed in her last 2 years, by a quiet young woman with steady hands and no name worth noticing, she made 2 last requests of her sister the Queen. The first was to reward the girl who had held her hand in the dark, and the second—" The Countess rose. She had never in her life delivered a blow sitting down. "The second was this, Marion's boy. His father is ruining him. When the crash comes, and it will come, let it not swallow her son. Watch over Ashford." The candle flame bent, straightened. "So when your father's debts came due, and the lawyers went hunting for any respectable arrangement to bury the scandal quietly, there was a hand on those events, boy, that you never saw. The Queen needed someone inside these walls she could trust absolutely." And Charlotte, the old lady's voice finally cracked, just slightly. Charlotte, who had already given 5 years of her youth to a dying woman's bedside, and had just been offered rest and honor and her own life at last. Charlotte heard whose son you were, and she said yes. She was not sold to you, Edmund. You were entrusted to her. There is a difference, and the difference is the size of everything you have done since. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand upon it and did not turn around. "You asked why she saved you. She made a promise to a dead woman who loved your mother. Now you know. And I will tell you the crueler thing, since we are being truthful tonight. Somewhere in these 3 years, God help her, I believe it stopped being only the promise. I have watched her watch you, boy, on the good days, the 2 or 3 of them there were. But you will never know what might have grown in this house. Because Thursday she goes home." The door closed. The Duke of Ashford put his head in his hands, alone with his candle, his name, his 400 rescued years, and the full arithmetic of what he had spent them on. Thursday came white and still. The carriage stood at the door by 9, not the ducal coach, a carriage sent down from London, with the royal cipher small and discreet upon the door. The whole household turned out onto the steps, in defiance of every rule of service. Betsy was crying openly. Mrs. Reed had given up telling her not to. Charlotte came down in her plain gray traveling dress and stopped before them, and then did something no duchess in England would have done. She spoke to them one by one. To Graves, whose hand she shook man to man, and said, "You have the finest catch in the county, Mr. Graves." To Mrs. Reed, "You knew from the first night, I think. Thank you for never asking." To Betsy, who could not speak at all, she gave the little parcel in her hands, and Betsy would open it that night to find the Duchess's own writing desk, the small one, from the north wing, with a note that said only, "Learn your letters properly, Betsy. Clever women should write things down." And then, at the foot of the steps in the snow, stood the Duke. He had been standing there half an hour. He had dressed plainly, no rings, no fur, nothing of the glitter he had bought with money he did not have. He looked, the The servant said afterward, 10 years older and 1 lifetime poorer, and when he spoke, no one had ever heard that voice from him before. "I'm not going to ask you to stay," he said. "I have spent 3 years giving you orders that shame me now, and I will not make my last words to you another one. And I am not going to tell you I have changed, because a man who tells you he has changed in a week is only performing again. And you above anyone, have seen enough performances in this house." Charlotte stood quietly, her hand on the carriage door, and let him finish. "I only want to say the truth once plainly because you have been owed it for 3 years. You were the finest thing in my life, and I treated you as the price of my debts. You saved this house, and I gave you the north wing. You held," his voice went, and he mastered it barely, "you held a dying princess's hand for love of a mother I cannot even remember, and I could not manage common courtesy at my own breakfast table. There is no apology the size of it. I know that. I am not asking for anything, Charlotte. I only could not let you leave believing that I do not no asterisk." The snow fell between them, the horses stamped and blew. And Charlotte looked at him, that long, calm, level look under which mistresses and lawyers and half of London society had come apart, and asked him one question. "Tell me one thing then, since we are being plain." Her voice was quiet, the whole world was quiet around it. "The day you saw the cup, was that the day you were sorry? Or were you sorry on every one of the days you broke me, and simply found it inconvenient to notice?" Edmund opened his mouth and closed it, because he was, for the first time in his life, honest, and the honest answer was the one that damned him. "I do not know. God forgive me, I do not know." Charlotte nodded slowly, as if he had answered aloud. "That is what I thought," she said, not cruelly, gently, which was infinitely worse. "The palace taught me many things, Edmund, but the sick room taught me the truest one. What people are when no one is watching is the only thing they are. For 3 years no one was watching you but me." She stepped up into the carriage. "When you know the answer to my question, truly know it, you will not need to tell me. It will show, somewhere, somehow. Those things always do." She settled her skirts. Graves, tears on his face, closed the carriage door with the softest click of his 40 years of service. "Goodbye, Edmund." The carriage moved. The household watched it down the long white avenue, growing smaller and smaller between the bare lime trees, carrying away the grey ghost, the thief of the north wing, the goddaughter of the Queen of England, until it turned at the far gates and was gone. The Duke of Ashford stood in the snow in front of his rescued house for a long time. Then he turned, walked past his silent servants, past the gold and crimson drawing room, up the great staircase, and into the north wing, where her one small candle still stood on the windowsill, burned down to a thumb's height of wax. He sat down in the cold in the room where she had waited, and looked out at the view she had looked at, and began, for the first time in his proud, blind, wasted life, to take his own measure. It would be 11 months before Charlotte saw Ashford Hall again. And what Edmund did in those 11 months, when no one was watching, is the last part of our story. Here is what the Duke of Ashford did not do in the 11 months that followed. He did not follow her to London. He did not write long letters of apology. He wrote none at all, in fact, and we shall come to why. He did not appear at court functions hoping to be seen looking sorrowful, though half of society expected exactly that. And when the Queen testing him, some said, let it quietly be known that the palace would not object to receiving the Duke of Ashford, he sent back one line that made Her Majesty read it twice. "Madam, I am grateful beyond words, but if I climb out of this pit on borrowed rope, I will have learned nothing at the bottom of it." Here is what he did instead. In the first month he sold the hunting stable, 14 horses, the envy of 3 counties. He kept 2 plow teams and 1 old mare. The mare Lavinia had been given, which he had bought back at auction with nearly the last of his ready money, and which he returned without a card to the farmer's daughter it had originally been taken from. In the second month, he closed the east wing, dismissed no servants, and cut his own household expenses to the bone instead. The tailors of London went into mourning. The Duke of Ashford wore last season's coat, and then the seasons before that, and discovered, he told Graves this once, quite seriously, that no one dies of it. And then he did the thing that stunned the county more than the Tea Party had. He began to work. Not gentleman's work, real work. He was in the estate office at 6 each morning with the land steward. He learned drainage and crop rotation, and the price of wool, subjects his father had considered beneath contempt, which, Edmund remarked grimly, explained a great deal about his father. He rode the tenant farms in all weathers, and the farmers, suspicious for a season, slowly found that when this new, quiet duke said a roof would be mended by Michaelmas, the roof was mended by Michaelmas. Ashford began slowly, acre by acre, honestly to breathe again. And how do we know all this? How did Charlotte know it in her apartments at the palace through those long months? Because of Betsy. Because a certain housemaid had been given a writing desk and an instruction clever women should write things down, and Betsy had taken it as a royal command. Once a month, in handwriting that began as a battlefield and ended, by summer, quite fine, a letter went up to London. Betsy told herself her Grace would want to know how Mrs. Reed's rheumatism did, and whether the roses had taken. And if each letter also happened to mention what his Grace had sold, and mended, and refused, and worn well. Clever women write things down. Charlotte read every letter twice. She answered every one, and she never once asked about the Duke, which, as Mrs. Reed observed to Graves, was the most interesting fact of all. 2 more things happened in those 11 months that no one was ever meant to know. The first was discovered by Mr. Marsh of the Treasury, who in the course of closing the Crane file noticed a curious payment leaving the Ashford accounts each quarter modest, regular, rooted with clumsy secrecy through a Salzburg bank. He investigated, because investigating was his nature. The money was going to an aunt in Salzburg for the education and dowries of 2 orphaned girls named von Riesing, the daughters of the dead count, the children of Lavinia's other victim, a man Edmund had never met, ruined by the same hands that had so nearly ruined him. Marsh uncharacteristically closed the file without a note, but Marsh dined at the palace sometimes. The second thing was discovered by Charlotte herself, and it happened, as the truest things do, entirely by accident. There was, in the market town 6 miles from Ashford, a foundling home, 20 children, a leaking roof, and never enough of anything. Charlotte had kept it alive for years with anonymous drafts, in the princess's memory, because the princess had loved children and had none. And every year on the anniversary of the princess's death, a cold, blue morning in late November, Charlotte visited it, veiled and unannounced as she had always done, palace or no palace. That November morning, her carriage stopped at the foundling home gate, and Charlotte looked across the yard and did not get out. Because there was a man in the yard, in rolled shirt sleeves in the bitter cold with his coat, last season's coat, and the seasons before that, hung on the fence. He was splitting firewood, and he had clearly been at it a long time, because the stack against the kitchen wall stood taller than the matron. Around him orbited perhaps 8 children, shrieking happily, entirely unafraid of him. One small girl of 5 or so sat commandingly upon the woodblock itself, and was instructing him where each log ought to go, and the man was taking her instructions with total seriousness, as though she were the queen and he nobody at all. Nobody at all knew him there, the matron told the veiled lady at the gate. He'd first come in the spring, asking awkwardly, like a man reciting something rehearsed, whether an idle pair of hands could be of use. He came every week now. Mended the roof in June, him and no other, terrified the whole street watching him up there. Never gave a name. The children called him Mr. Ned. We think, the matron confided, he must have lost someone. He has that way about him. Doing penance, my mother would have called it. Though for what a gentle soul like that, heaven only knows. Charlotte stood at the gate for a long time, veiled, unseen, watching her husband when he could not know that anyone was watching at all. What people are when no one is watching is the only thing they are. The small girl on the woodblock said something. The man threw back his head and laughed, a real laugh, unperformed. The laugh perhaps of the boy who had once stood before his father's portrait and sworn not to end like him. And Charlotte turned, walked quickly back to her carriage, and sat very still behind the veil the whole way to London. That evening the Queen, who missed nothing, looked at her goddaughter across the chessboard and said, "You are not attending, my dear. You have played your bishop like a woman thinking about the country." "Forgive me, ma'am." The Queen moved her knight and smiled at the board, and said, in the mild voice she used for her most dangerous observations, "Marsh tells me the Ashford accounts are the cleanest in 6 counties. He tells me other things too." A pause. 11 months, child. Even I only required 10 years of you. Go and see whether the man is finished or don't, but finish something. You are wearing out my chess set. The invitation came in the first week of December. It was not addressed to the palace, to the Duchess, to her Grace. It was carried by hand by Graves himself, who had asked for the honor and would have fought a man for it, and the envelope said only Charlotte. Inside there was no letter, only a small card. "The green morning room. Any day you choose, there will be tea." The green morning room. Not the gold and crimson drawing room of triumphs and executions. That room had been quietly restored, Betsy's letters said, to the Duchess's grandmother's furniture, carried down from the attic by the Duke's own order. No. The green morning room was the small, plain, unimportant room where, 4 years earlier, a proud man and a quiet woman had been introduced by a lawyer and had exchanged 11 words, and where he had not once looked her in the eye. She came on a Thursday. Of course she came on a Thursday. He was standing when she entered, plainly dressed, thinner, older around the eyes in a way that suited him, and so visibly terrified that Mrs. Reed, closing the door, wanted to pat him on the shoulder as if he were the footman's boy on his first day. The room was almost bare. A fire, 2 chairs. Between them a small table laid for tea laid, she saw at once, by no servant's hand. The cloth minutely crooked, the spoons a soldier's inch too far apart. A man had done this alone, taking enormous pains. And at her place, at the asterisk head of the little table, stood a single cup. It was not fine. It had been broken badly into many pieces and mended by hand clumsily, with visible seams of gold-tinted glue, by someone who had clearly never mended anything before in his life, and had refused all help. A plain white cup with a thin blue band, the sort of thing found in any nursery. "It was my mother's," Edmund said. His voice was steady only because he had evidently rehearsed this one part past the possibility of failure. "Almost the only thing of hers that survives. My father sold her jewels, but who buys a nursery cup? I found it last winter in the north wing in a box. I broke it taking it down. A breath. It seemed fitting. I have spent 11 months learning to mend things I broke through carelessness. This one took the longest. It still leaks a little on the left side. I am told." And here the rehearsal ran out, and what was left was only the man. "I am told some things do after mending, and hold tea all the same." Charlotte looked at the little cup for a long moment. The fire ticked. Somewhere below stairs, an entire household was pretending very hard not to hold its breath. "You never wrote to me," she said. 11 months, not one letter." "You told me not to." He met her eyes. "You said when I knew the answer I would not need to tell you, it would show, somewhere, somehow." He gestured a small, helpless movement that took in the mended cup, the crooked cloth, the plain coat, the whole quiet, unglittering, rebuilt year of him. "This was my letter, Charlotte, all of it. I did not do it so that you would hear of it. I did it because a woman I broke told me the truth about myself on my own front steps, and it was the first true thing anyone had said to me in 30 years. and I could not bear to be what I was for even one more winter. If you had never come back at all, I would still." He stopped, mastered it, and then said the rest very simply, as a man lays down a burden he has carried a long way. "Your cup was a queen's gift. Mine is only a broken man's apology. But if you sit down at this table today, or in 10 years, or only once more in this life, you sit at the head of it. You will never be invisible in this house again. That much I can promise, because it is the one debt at Ashford that will never, ever lapse." Outside, it had begun to snow, the first snow of that winter, falling soft and white and clean over the park, over the north wing, over the long avenue of bare lime trees down which a carriage had once carried her away. Charlotte drew out the chair at the head of the table and sat, and picked up the little mendied cup, and held it out to him. "Well then," said the Duchess of Ashford, "pour." His hands shook so badly that he flooded the saucer, and missed the cup entirely on the first attempt, and laughed that real laugh, the woodyard laugh, and begged her pardon and tried again. The cup leaked a little, on the left side. It held tea all the same. 5 years have passed. Come one last time up the long avenue of lime trees, green and full now, to Ashford Hall. You would hardly know the house, not because it glitters rather less, in fact, than in the old Duke's day. The change is harder to name than that. The windows stand open in summer. The tenant farms are the tidiest in 6 counties. The servants stay for decades and turn down better wages elsewhere and cannot quite explain why. And invitations to Ashford, which once went begging, are now the most quietly prized in England, because society has learned that at Ashford, and perhaps only at Ashford, a person is received for what they are, and not for what they wear. Society learned that lesson on a certain Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock over tea. Society, whatever its other failings, never forgot it. Lavinia Crane saw England for the last time from the deck of a transport ship, 14 months after that afternoon. The trial had been brief. The evidence, page 31, the Brussels letters, a leather case caught in midair by a butler, was a wall no charm could climb. In Botany Bay, they say, she married a sergeant of Marines within 2 years, and it is reported that she manages his accounts with ruthless brilliance and total honesty, being the one woman in the colony who knows exactly where dishonesty ends. Some people are only ever one choice away from being formidable in a better cause. Make of her what you will. Charlotte always refused to hate her, which infuriated the county, and said only, "She taught my husband's house who its friends were." Villains are sometimes very instructive. Mr. Pole's 10 years of swept trails were unswept by Mr. Marsh, with the patience of a man cleaning silver. He will be a guest of the crown for a very long time. The maid Sarah was not dismissed. This astonished everyone but the Duchess, who observed that a frightened girl bribed with £3 had been failed first by the people set over her, and gave her a second chance in the laundry. Sarah has since risen to head laundress, and would now walk into fire for her mistress, and knows it, and so does everyone else. Betsy, but you have guessed about Betsy. Betsy is her Grace's own lady's maid now, and writes the finest hand in the household, and has recently terrified the footmen by beginning to keep a journal. The Dowager Countess Whitmore, 85 and outrageously alive, still comes every Thursday. She claims it is for the conversation. It is actually for the small girl who runs to meet her carriage. Because there is a small girl. She was born 3 years after the tea party in the great bed of Ashford Hall, and her father, who had faced down bankruptcy, scandal, and the collapse of everything he thought he was, had to be led from the door by Graves and given brandy like any other terrified husband. They named her Marion. For a grandmother she will know only as a portrait. A laughing young woman wearing, if you look closely at the painted collar, a small brooch shaped like forget-me-nots. At the christening, the whole county watched a plainly dressed godmother take the baby in her arms with the ease of a woman who had held many babies, and only when the vicar's voice cracked on "Your Majesty," did half the congregation realize who had been sitting in the third pew all along. The Queen of England held Marion of Ashford at the font, and looked down at her for a long moment, and then glanced sideways at Charlotte with the mild expression she used for her most dangerous observations. "Forget-me-nots," said the Queen, touching the christening gown which Charlotte had embroidered herself. "Of course. Did your mother ever tell you, my dear, where her brooch came from?" And that is the last thread of our story, the one the Dowager Countess had promised herself she would unravel before she died, and never needed to, because the Queen unraveled it at the font. Long ago, long before dukes and debts, a young princess had a childhood companion at the summer waters, not Marion of Ashford only, but two girls she loved. One was Marion. The other was a gentle, bookish girl of no particular family, who later married a poor baron named Hale and died too young, leaving a 9-year-old daughter. When that girl married, the princess had given her a brooch from her own collar, gold and pearl, forget-me-nots, the flower of her private china. "So you will remember," she had said, "that you were loved in high places, whatever plain places life may take you to." And years later, when the princess lay dying and the palace searched for a companion with steady hands, no ambitions, and a silent tongue, the princess herself had whispered the name from her pillow. Anne Hale had a daughter. "Find me Anne's daughter." So you see, Charlotte was never nobody. Nobody ever is. She was the second generation of a love story between three girls at a watering place, and the cup and the brooch had been trying to find their way back to each other, through all those years and all that grief, like two halves of one sentence. Things of real value always find their way home in the end. Which brings us, as everything at Ashford brings us, to the drawing room, and the tall glass cabinet, and the highest shelf. It is never locked now. The key on its ribbon was retired the day Marion was christened, and on that shelf, side by side where the whole world may see them, stand two cups. One is white and gold, very fine, ringed with painted forget-me-nots around a small crowned monogram, the gift of a queen, for 2 years of held hands in the dark. The other is plain white with a thin blue band, broken once into many pieces and mended clumsily, with visible seams, by a man who had never mended anything before, and who has mended in the years since nearly everything. New guests always ask. They cannot help it. They see the royal cup and gasp, and then they see its shabby neighbor and their eyebrows go up, and sooner or later, over tea, someone gathers the courage. "But your grace, forgive me, why do you display a broken cup?" And the Duchess of Ashford, who was once the grey ghost, and then a thief, and then a legend, always gives the same answer, with the same small smile, while at the end of the table her husband studies his plate like a schoolboy. Because in this house, we have learned that the most precious things are the ones that were broken and made again. They pour the tea. The little girl is allowed one story before bed, and always demands the one about the wicked lady and the magic cup, and her father always tells it, and always leaves himself out of it, and her mother always puts him back in. And society still tells its version in London drawing rooms to this day. How the proud Duke ordered his wife to pour tea for his mistress before 40 witnesses. How the wife said nothing at all, and reached instead for the highest shelf. They never forgot it, they never will. But here at Ashford, where the lamps are being lit and the two cups stand shining side by side in the cabinet, what is remembered is something quieter and truer, and it is this: that patience is not weakness, and silence is not surrender. And that sometimes, in the hands of the right woman, a single teacup can be louder than a cannon. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.